Hello guys, this is What About Nintendo. Today I'm here for the second spooky Halloween themed video of this year. This time I'm going to be talking about how Nintendo could make the Breath of the Wild sequel more spooky than the original Breath of the Wild. So let's get right on into it. Most of the 3D Zelda games have a few scary moments in them, whether that be the bottom of the well in Ocarina of Time, or the Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess. Hell, even Wind Waker has the ghost ship, which is pretty spooky. However, Breath of the Wild is kind of the exception to this rule. I can't really think of a single part of the game that is really that frightening. Sure, there are style moblins, goblins, and the like, but they're not really scary. So I decided to talk about how I think Nintendo can make Breath of the Wild just a bit more spooky. Let's get into it. Enemies. First things first, if we're gonna get more scary moments in Breath of the Wild 2, we need some more frightening enemies. Bokoblins, Moblins, and Keese just aren't gonna cut it. We need something that evokes a little more terror than that. Enemy variety is a problem with Breath of the Wild in general, but especially when it comes to the spooky side of things. This series' most petrifying staples are missing in action in Breath of the Wild. Poes, Skulltulas, Wolfos, Redeads, Floor Masters, Wall Masters, and more are all absent from the game. On top of that, the current designs for skeletal enemies in Breath of the Wild aren't very scary looking. Their overly cartoony and pretty plain designs just don't get your heart racing like some of the previous titles. I think we would need some more spookier versions of these enemies. Maybe have some half-zombie versions where you can see chunks of rotten flesh still cling to the bones. Or perhaps make them a bit more decomposed looking. They're a bit too perfectly preserved at the moment. Perhaps having them a bit more worn down and dirty looking, maybe even with some blood on them, could make them a bit more menacing. And of course we gotta talk about the scary bosses as well, because the ones in Breath of the Wild sure as hell aren't. We've had some truly nightmarish bosses in Zelda games before, like Phantom Ganon, Dead Hand, Goma, and tons more that have made for some absolutely hair-raising moments in the other Zelda games. Yet in Breath of the Wild, all we have are the 4 Blights, which, while being fairly cool looking, aren't really all that frightening, and are of course all very similar in design to one another. I will say that the first phase of the final boss fight against Calamity Ganon is kind of more intimidating, but not really in a scary way. It also doesn't help that the place you fight the Blights in, the Divine Beast, isn't really at all spooky, and that leads to my next point: locations. Of course, if you're gonna have scary enemies, you need a scary place to put those enemies. A Poe isn't going to be nearly as menacing if you put him in a sunny, flowery field after all. And that is definitely an issue for Breath of the Wild in terms of spookiness. It's typical for Nintendo games to have a few more spooky areas. Graveyards are definitely a staple in the 3D and 2D games, yet we don't really have one in Breath of the Wild. Apparently people just don't do burials in that universe. Maybe they prefer cremation. Anyways, graveyards are scarce. But of course there are other scary areas in Zelda games, such as the Redead-filled Castle Town in Ocarina of Time, and of course various dungeons throughout the series such as the Earth Temple in Wind Waker, the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time, and the Ancient Cistern Dungeon in Skyward Sword, which by the way I talk much more about in my video I made just the other day titled 3 times Nintendo games suddenly became horrifying, so you should check that out in the eye if you haven't already. Looking back on the trailer for the Breath of the Wild sequel, we can see an area that is already pretty spooky. It's underground, very dark, and with a few creepy enemies, could be set up for a more horror-focused area. With the castle rising in the trailer and the earth shaking, it's a common theory that underground exploration may be a big factor in this game, with many new cave systems opening up due to the seismic activity. Therefore, I think the underground areas are a good place for Nintendo to set up some terrifying moments. Throw some Redeads in there, some Poes, Floor Masters, and the like, and maybe make an area an ancient burial ground or something, and bam, we're in for a horrifying time. I think they could also make a connection to the ancient Zonai tribe. We know that they are responsible for creating many of the ruins we see in Breath of the Wild, and it is said that they are an ancient barbaric tribe that may have used powerful magic. However, we also know that they suddenly disappeared for an unknown reason thousands of years ago. These people even predate Sheikah, which created the towers and shrines seen in the game 10,000 years before the events of Breath of the Wild. I'm curious to see if the disappearance of the Zonai may have some more sinister implications. Perhaps like the supposed torture chambers we see in Ocarina of Time, we could see hints of another gruesome event related to the Zonai in Breath of the Wild sequel. Music. The final thing you need for a good spook is of course creepy music. While a lot of music in Zelda games is very bombastic and melodious, there are also a lot of songs that are darker, more sinister. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are definitely the two that have the most of this type of music, and the atmosphere of those games is much darker for it. Breath of the Wild, however, has a different style of music for most areas than the typical Zelda game. Rather than relying on strong, vibrant melodies, it uses more natural, ambient sounds with more low-key instrumentals. However, that doesn't mean the sequel can't have scary music. I think it's very possible for Nintendo to compose music in that Breath of the Wild style, and still have it feel very haunting. I think the key to this would be timing and build-up. What I mean by that is to have the music dynamically get more dramatic as you near an enemy. Say for example you're in an empty room. The music is very quiet, very slow, lots of subtle but creepy environmental sounds, some light but spooky piano notes, and the occasional string instrument cropping up with an unsettling set of notes. However, as you near an enemy, or something more creepy like say a demonic statue, that music can start to ramp up a bit. Then you have the perfect opportunity for jump scare music as well. By having the music so slow and low key, suddenly ramping up the music to an 11 when a Redead jumps out of nowhere in a dark underground cavern will have you jumping out of your chair screaming. However, not every area in Breath of the Wild uses such low key music, and I don't think every creepy area has to as well. While earlier I said that Breath of the Wild didn't really have any scary moments at all, that's not entirely true. There is one place in Breath of the Wild currently that is a bit spooky, and they could build on this a bit more. What I'm referring to is the Lost Woods that surrounds the Great Deku Tree. It's got tons of fog, trees with gruesome faces, and generally an atmosphere that is very unsettling. The music definitely helps this a lot. It has a more direct form of music, though not as melody-driven as the creepy music in previous games. It does, however, help to build that sense of spine-tingling eeriness, as well as making you truly feel like you are getting lost. While not exactly how I think a spooky area in the game would sound, it's a good example of something that gets close to it. I think if they add some of those elements from the Lost Woods into an area with more enemies, and music that is even more eerie, we could get some good scares from it. Anyways guys, those are my ideas for how Nintendo could make Breath of the Wild sequel more scary. I mean, as I mentioned before, the trailer itself for Breath of the Wild sequel is a lot more scary than anything we see in the original Breath of the Wild. I mean, we have freaking undead Ganondorf right there. He's pretty scary already. The atmosphere of the area they're in is fairly unsettling, and I think that they could build on that in more areas and add some more enemies and different music and things like that. That could make for some scarier moments in Breath of the Wild too, because I mean, that's kind of a staple in Zelda games, especially games like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which isn't really a thing in Breath of the Wild, and I kind of miss it. I like those areas where you're randomly really spooked in a Zelda game. Anyways guys, thank you for watching. Make sure to let me know down in the comments below what you thought of my ideas for making the Breath of the Wild sequel more scary, and if you have any ideas of your own, let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that bell icon for notifications of all my videos. I believe I'm going to have one or two more scary videos coming out this year, hopefully. But of course, there's going to be all kinds of other Nintendo themed content you're not going to want to miss. Also, make sure to share this video with everyone you know who's a fan of Zelda games, Nintendo games, and scary moments in video games. And I'll see all you awesome people later on What About Nintendo. Bye!